Michael Vandergrift, MCV Realty Group.
Just to help our team grow and help our clients so much better, in this,
Hello, everyone. Michael Vandergrift, Daryl Watson and team here at MCV Realty. Going over a high overview of our cheat sheet on the purchase agreement on how to fill this out properly. And this is going to be a high overview. But I just want to make sure this information's out there. Do not copy this. It is copyrighted. I believe you have to have a license to be able to fill this out. But we do fill out the listing broker here, selling broker here, date it, put the buyer on there, whether it's an LLC or a person, property known as, legally described as. Right here, this section is the personal property, which is usually things that aren't attached to the home, usually a refrigerator, washer, dryer. You would list those here, list anything excluded that you might be taking with. Sometimes people want to take their security systems with them. Well, if it's nailed, screwed, glued, or bolted to the property, it's personal property. Or it's permanent fixture of the home, and it's real property. So if you are taking any real property from the home that is connected by nails, screws, glued, or bolted, it would need to be listed here in this excludes section. Then we've got the price, which is always typically the most important thing to everyone. But you got to remember the other 7 pages of this are contingencies and conditions that could be more important than the price or could weigh on that price. Earnest money is submitted as good faith money for their recommend 10%, minimum of 500 is market, usually about 5 days to get it. Lately, we've been sending it to the title company. Recommend good funds on that. We're telling people not to do personal checks anymore. We prefer it either be wired or a cashier's check. Money order, but I'm not a big fan of money orders because if it gets lost, I don't know where that money goes or how you would even get it back. So that's always a concern. And when you're doing wires, make sure we are guiding you in that process and you're not falling for some scam. So be very careful with wire transfers. Money gets stolen a lot that way and fraudulent scams. Then there's always the method of payment, whether you're doing cash or you're doing some type of financing. And then this financing section would need to be filled out. Typically, I put market price here on the things to exceed. You want to have something on here because this was added back after the 9/11 attacks because interest rates jumped drastically like the next day after 9/11, and a lot of people got stuck in ridiculous interest rates. I heard stories about they jumped to like 20% overnight. So that's why they added this years ago with where we put typically market rate or put an actual interest hold so that the buyer can get out if the interest rate goes too high. We've also got, down here, we've got time for obtaining financing. Typically, you want to have 7 days. You want to have your application in after an accepted offer. 30 to 45, typically, depending on financing for approval. You're going to need the 45s in there in case it's a USDA or FHA or some types of loans that we know are going to take a little bit longer. And then closing here, it's on or before a certain date, and we'll put it to that typically. Or you could change it to so many days after approval or so many days after appraisal. But typically, we'll just select a date that it needs to be on or before. Then the closing fee is typically we mark it shared equally, but you could, depending on the offer you want to send, the buyer could pay it, to make the offer stronger, or you could ask the seller to pay it, if you're given already enough money. Then here comes the contingency on do you need to sell your other home? Is normally don't want to have it contingent. It makes your offer stronger if you're not. But if you have a property you have to sell to get the money for maybe your down payment or closing costs, then you would put that in here and fill this out appropriately. Then we get down to possession, which lately the market's calling for at closing. Used to be you get 30 days, not so much anymore. You can still get that. We've gotten 90 before, but that's pushing the envelope on that. And then it's got a section here where you could put in a rent amount per day. And then it's also got a liquidated damages amount you could put here in case they destroy anything or break anything after. Then we've got survey here. Typically, most properties in a platted lot subdivision aren't going to need it, but you would put in here whether you're waiving that, whether you're doing a boundary or a survey location report, and then who's paying for it. Typically, the seller, most people try to get the seller to pay for the survey because if the deal falls through, the seller still has the survey, but every deal you can do whatever you want on here. Flood area, you typically want to mark this in case you have really high flood insurance if you are in a flood zone, but you could make your offer stronger by putting may not and just biting the bullet on it. Building use limitations. This was added for homeowners associations a couple years ago. You now have to mark what use you're planning on using the home for. Most time people are using a single family. But if you were going to run some type of business out of it, you want to mark others so that they know that, hey, I'm doing a hair salon in the back or something, because a lot of homeowners associations don't allow businesses in the home. Homeowners insurance, this is kind of a lender requirement. We usually put 10 days that you've got to get a quote after an accepted offer to get your homeowner's insurance. Then this is the all-important inspections part. And this is where you have 3 different options. You can waive the right to independent inspections, which we never recommend unless you are somebody that knows what they're doing, an investor, experienced, and a very experienced consumer buyer. I would not do that. You can reserve the right, and then you can do an inspection response. And if you reserve the right, then you need to fill in this section on the response period. Or you could do an as-is addendum, which is another addendum we'll go over at another time, that allows you to do inspections and get out of the deal if you find a material or latent defect. You find a state-recognized defect, you can get out of the deal. And then on the inspection period, if you're filling this out and you're reserving the right, typically right now market's calling for about 10 days, and then you want to make sure you've got an additional 7 in case you run into an option. If you run into an issue with something, you've got an additional 7 days to get more inspections done to further inspect something that possibly a general home inspection found. Limited home warranties aren't real common in a seller's market, so we haven't seen many of them, but you could ask for it and you could ask the seller to pay for it, or you could pay for it yourself. Disclosures, according to Indiana state law, have to be filled out prior to accepting an offer. If the house is built prior to 1978, it needs a lead-based paint. Residential sales disclosures need to be on all properties of the condition of the home. There are exemptions to sellers' residential sales disclosure, like estates and trusts. But for most homes, they'll need to have a seller's residential sales disclosure, and that would need to be filled out with the purchase agreement. So you definitely want to check whether you have or have not. Title approval, I always recommend title insurance commitment. You could go further and get an abstract too, but typically we just get a title insurance. Like I said, very seldom is abstract done. Owner's title insurance, the seller typically pays for that, but it could be either any way you want to write up the offer. Lender's title insurance is typically paid by the buyer. And the benefit goes to the one not paying for it, obviously. And then title, you always want to have ordered immediately, but you want to make sure to select whether the seller or the buyer. If you're the seller, you want to, if you want to let the seller do it, when you're writing up an offer, you're always a buyer. So I always click the buyer, and I want to use the title company I want to use, but you always want to put that title company in here too. Taxes, typically you want to just click the prorated on 2 here. That's typically what's done. But to make your offer more aggressive as a buyer, you could pay their taxes that are due, because taxes are building arrears. So it's kind of weird when you get into that in the proration on taxes, because you're actually, when you take over the house, you're going to be paying their taxes. So they usually give you a credit for that at the thing, and the seller has to pay for that. But you could pay those for them and not get that credit and make your offer more aggressive, and click box 1. Box 3 is just for new construction. Then we get down to homeowners association. You want to make sure you've got the documents for the covenants, restrictions, all that stuff within 7 days. And then I always put 7 in here for response time. Then it goes through some more legal stuff. I always put NA here because it's already got general warranty deed. But if you were to put the house in a living trust or something, that's where this would go on conveyance of this property. If you were going to put it into an estate or a living trust or whatnot, you would write that in here. Or survivorship. That's another common deed that's done. And then you always want to make sure if the buyer is a real estate agent, they would make sure to put their license number here and disclose that they are. And then here's further conditions, which typically you want to limit your wording in this because we're not attorneys. And these documents are fill in the blanks done by Indiana Association of Realtors lawyers. So we just pretty much fill in the blanks. Typically, what you're going to want here is C as is addendum or C escalation clause. Or, and there are some IAR approved wordings for appraisal gaps that you can put on there. But other than that, you kind of want to keep the further conditions as limited as possible to not be acting like an attorney. And then you always want to disclose here whether it's a limited agency, whether in a limited agency is where you represent both sides. So this is or is not a limited agency. And then an offer should have an expiration date, but in this seller's market extreme we've been, I've sent a couple of these and just put no expiration date and said just accept it if you want to accept it or don't. So I mean you could write an offer and send it without an expiration date if you're being really aggressive and your client really wants the house. But normally there's going to be an expiration date. Normally I tell people we want to give them at least 24 hours to review it just to be nice to the seller. Or you could make it the next day at noon. I've seen some people get aggressive and only give you a few hours, which I've also seen sellers get really upset over not having time. So, it's just what you feel best. But when you're writing a purchase agreement, you're representing a buyer. You're wanting to try to win the house somehow. So giving them some time is usually a good idea. And then you've got to make sure to have all buyers sign, especially if it's finance. Sometimes you have to add on another sheet and do an addendum for more signatures if there are. There is an addendum. And we're going to focus on going over all of these documents and all the IAR documents, doing 2 or 3 a week just to make sure to give transparency out there to what these are. And so people know that these are legally binding contracts. There is no get out of it. Once these are signed by both parties and accepted, you're in a legal contract. So we want to make sure that people are understanding them a little bit better. So thank you for watching. Be sure to share, like, subscribe, and let us know if you need anything or need us to go into further detail on this.